Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari and today I am doing my mid-month wrap-up. So I am going to do this in the order that I read all of the books. It will be alphabetical by title because that's how I read them. And I am going to try and make it a priority to cover 5 points per book. First, I'm going to give you a summary, then I'm going to tell you what I felt about it, then I will let you know if there was any rep in the book, I will let you know if there are any trigger warnings in the book, and then I will tell you what my star rating is. This is just hopefully to organize my thoughts. I am also doing this like just off the cuff, I guess is the way to put it, where I had not planned out what I'm going to talk about for any of these books. So hopefully this isn't a disaster. The first book of the month and the letter A was All the Stars in Teeth by Adeline Grace. This is a young adult fantasy novel where a girl is supposed to like do this performative magic in order to one day take over for her father. Basically, her like bloodline is like the ruling bloodline of this island group, country. It's a country of islands, and only like one person directly descended in her family can perform this particular magic, and the magic is supposed to like protect everybody else, but you have to like give an example. You have to like perform this magic in order to be like elected to be the next ruler of the country. And the like flap here tells you all of this, but that's like a spoiler for the first 100 pages, so sorry, I just spoiled that for you. I hated this book. So I don't particularly recommend you read it, so I don't really feel bad about spoiling it for you and being an asshole like that. But anyway, this is very young adult. Like, most of the way through this book I am like screaming like, where are your parents? What is going on? Like, her parents are supposed to like, or not even supposed to, they are the rulers of this entire country, and they are by far the worst, most irresponsible parents of all fucking time. The story is very convenient. There's a lot of like very typical young adult tropes with like the love triangle, which is really a love V because it's like two guys off of one girl who is very generic. She's so generic that the young female reader can just put herself in the place of this girl and have two guys who are totally in love with her. But on top of being very generic, she is a bitch. Like, she is an entitled, spoiled brat bitch who somebody needs to tell her no. That being said, there are a couple of things that this book does right. First off, the consent in this book is amazing. If like the men are very, very much about like, are you okay with this? Are you okay with this? And continually like checking, and if she says no, it's instantly stopped. And there was a really like unnecessary but very good like representation of a young girl having a period where she's wearing white pants and then bleeds through the white pants, and all the guys around her are like, ew, ew. And she's like, half the fucking world bleeds every month and you're gonna act like this is disgusting and it's not just normal every day? Like, fuck off. And then she went around wearing the bloody pants until they stopped being like infantile about it. So unnecessarily, had nothing at all to do with the story, but more young girls should learn that it's not like an embarrassment to have a period. It's just natural. As far as rep, there is no there's no rep in here. As far as trigger warnings, I don't remember any, but so there's nothing that like really stands out, but I'm sure there's like trigger warnings for like grief and like loss of a parent, loss of a loved one type thing, but it's not anything that's like, I need to warn you about this before you go into it. As far as star rating, I gave this 2 stars. It was awful. I already said that. The next book was Bearers of the Black Staff, which is the first of my 2 Shannara books. I'm going to go through this very quick because I'm going to have an entire video about this and the other book in the duology at the end of the month. So this is just a continuation of the last trilogy, 500 years after the end of the last book that I read in the Shannara universe. I'm not going to go into it because it's like, this is 3 like series deep within an overarching universe. Feelings, this was awful. It was so bad. I hated it. Rep, no, not really any rep. There's some like vague allusions you could make to like why racism's bad, but there's no specific rep in here. For trigger warnings, the only real trigger warnings you would have in here would be like violence. But even that is not extreme. Star rating, I give this a 3 stars. It was apparently a reread, and the first time that I read it, back in like 2011, when I first started my Goodreads account, I didn't review it, but I gave it 2 stars, and apparently I upped it to 3 stars this time. Because it's like, okay, it's a continuation story in the Shannara universe, but why the fuck does this exist? Next up is Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in the Last Hours trilogy and like very deep in the Shadowhunters universe. Summary again, I'm gonna keep it short because it's gonna, like anything that I say about this book is going to spoil something. But basically in this universe there are half human, half angels known as Shadowhunters, and they are like protect humanity from demons, and there's also, and they kind of like fight demons. That's it. They fight demons. They're kind of assholes, but they still fight demons. This takes place in the Victorian era, in Victorian London. Feelings. I hated the ending of this book so much. I wanted to like throw things and scream, and it was just, it was the worst ending ever. I hated it. I hated it. I still gave this book 4 stars, and I hated that ending so much. As far as rep, there's quite a lot of rep. One of the main characters is Middle Eastern. We have gay male characters, and we have a sapphic relationship in here. Due to the time frame of Victorian England, there is a trigger warning for having to like hide their queerness. Some characters are more open about it than the others. Some of them are very like refuse to admit even to themselves that they're queer. So there's a little bit of trigger warnings for this. There's also trigger warnings for violence, like every other book that I read apparently. Next up was an arc that I read called A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. This was the second book in the Texacalan trilogy, I think. It may have been a duology, but second book in the Texacalan series. So this is a series about politics in space. So this is like space opera, like sci-fi super space opera that is only about politics in war, and that is a very like niche genre, which either you really like it or you want nothing to do with it. I do not like political space operas at all, but I really love Arkady Martine's writing. So I keep reading these books for the writing. But I know a lot of people who love political space operas, and they love this series. So, Rep, there is a sapphic relationship in this book, and there is the sci-fi equivalent to like a multiracial like relationship, where one of the races in this book is considered a lesser race, and she is in a relationship with a woman from the more privileged race, I guess is the best way to put that. In this series, like, race doesn't really seem to be about like skin color or anything like that. It's basically like the nation you're from. The universe in this book, I also believe, though I'm not 100% sure, is based off of Persian mythology. So there's that rep too. Trigger warnings, violence, death, that kind of thing all over again. And star rating, I gave this a 3-star. Like I said, if this sounds like a book that you are interested in because you like the tropes, you will probably like it a whole lot more than I did. Next up, I read A Lasso by Darcy Little Badger. This is a young adult, it might even be a middle grade, fantasy about a young girl who can see ghosts. But in this universe, like, animal ghosts are good, human ghosts are evil. And yeah, that's basically the gist of it. It's kind of like a mystery a little bit in there. Her cousin dies at the very, 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 very beginning of the book, so that's not really a spoiler, and she's trying to figure out like what happened. So this was like wholesome, but wholesome in a way where it doesn't like take away from like the conflict in the book. So like I really liked the character of Alassaway, or Ellie, and like I liked the story overall, and it was like, oh, like a lot of it was like, oh god, it's so sweet, but it's not like without conflict. Like, bad shit happens in this book, but it's still wholesome. Which sounds weird, but you're just gonna have to trust me. This is the kind of book that if you really enjoyed The House in the Cerulean Sea, you'll probably like this book a lot. I also, just a disclaimer, like you see the cover here and it looks kind of like it's a snowy setting, like maybe Alassaway is part of like an Inuit tribe or something like that. She's not. This takes place in the Texas summer. Like the snowy look is actually ghost dogs. So it's ghost, not snow. Because like one of her best friend, well, her best animal friend is a ghost dog. So that's like the look of the cover here. Rep, Alassaway is indigenous, even though she's not part of the Inuit tribe. She is Lipan Apache, and like I said, this takes place in Texas. Trigger warnings, racism, death, violence, that kind of thing. I can't think of anything else that like really stood out. Like the racism is a big part of this, and like how Alassaway and her family like deal with racism coming back towards them. Star rating, I gave this book a 4-star. It was a little young for me, so I couldn't like give it the 4 or 5 stars because I just don't really, I'm too old and too bitter to appreciate middle grade. Next up, oh boy, we have 4 Seasons at Angelinos by Carolyn McBride. This is basically this 36-year-old woman. I need to put my phone down for this because I'm about to rant. This 36-year-old woman what was her name? Charlotte finds out like randomly, like this is like literally a throwaway line in the book, but she finds out that she has something wrong with her ovaries and she has 2 years at best to have kids. So instead of, you know, like being an adult and freezing her eggs or having like an in vitro treatment and being a single parent, she decides that she has a year to find true love, and she is the like PR person, like head PR person for this restaurant called Angelinos. So she lives in New York City, works in New York City. So this is supposed to be a satirical rom-com, but it's not satirical, it's not romantic, and there is not one funny thing about the whole book. The writing isn't very good. It's like 14-year-old fan fiction writing. The plot is problematic hot garbage. I would strongly encourage that the author of this book seek psychological help for just the vast amounts of internalized misogyny she has, but she spent part of the book trash talking psychologists and mental health in general, so I doubt that's going to happen. The only vague redeeming quality of this book was the pacing was done well, so I managed to get through it without vomiting. If I wasn't reading this specifically for a like challenge, I would have DNF'd this on page 4 when she is being gaslighted by a current boyfriend who she had just found out was married, and somehow he managed to convince her that he never, like, it was kind of like she was in her head and we're reading what she's saying in her, or like what she's thinking, and she's like, I remember all of these instances that he says he loves me, that he's looking forward to us like having a future together, we're getting married, and then he's like, babe, you knew I was married. Like, I don't know what you're thinking. I never planned to leave my wife. Like, you knew going into this. And he's like gaslighting her into thinking that she's crazy. And then, like, she's not crazy. In her own head, we have that like dialogue of like, no, I remember all of these instances. And by the end of like this conversation where he just keeps gaslighting her, she's like, no, I think he's right. I must have imagined all of these things that I remember, and I still love him. Maybe he'll leave his wife for me. And it's like, oh, I hate shit like that. It gets worse from there. Every single one of these blue or purple tabs that we have is a macro or microaggression, where it's like racism, it's a misogynistic statement, like, we're gonna like wipe the board clean. There is not a like group of peoples, there is not an identifier of human beings that this author has not insulted or offended in some way in this book. Like, she went hard. She was like, how many people can I offend in 300 pages? And the answer was all of them. All of them. The main theme of the book seems to be misogyny, but like, she doesn't leave it out. She doesn't leave anything out. Like, they're opening restaurants in like different countries, and she's like insulting people in Korea. She's mocking Indian culture, mocking Italians, mocking Hispanics. I mean, everything. So there you go. Rep, there is no rep. I mean, like, there's a lot of people represented, a lot of peoples and cultures represented in here, but none of it is good rep. So I'm not going to say there's any decent rep. Trigger warnings. Hold on, I got a list. Misogyny, racism, xenophobia, fat shaming, ableism, rape, sexism, homophobia, slut shaming, cheating, repeated use of a dead name, and I'm sure there are other things that I just can't remember. So we've talked about books about like war and shit like that before this, and none of them had that list of trigger warnings. This is supposed to be a romantic comedy. How the fuck is it filled with all of these triggers? I gave this a 1 star. If I was able to give it anything less than a 1 star, I definitely would have. And I encourage you, if you own this book, or you have it on your TBR, or you were thinking maybe you want to read it, to burn this book and just remove it from your head for your sake, not mine. Moving on from that hot trash, I read The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers. And Becky Chambers is one of my auto-buy authors, and I knew that this book was going to be fantastic, so I'm glad that G came after F in the alphabet. This is book 4, I want to say, in the Wayfarer series. This may be the final book in the Wayfarer series, but it's not really a series that you have to read in order. All of the books are very like loosely related to each other. Basically in every one of these books there is one character who can be traced back to somebody in the first novel. So I would say like maybe read the very first book, which is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, first, just so you have like the association. But if you have no desire to read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and you just want to pick this one up, you're not gonna miss out anything at all, other than whenever one of the characters mentions Ashby, you won't have any fucking idea who Ashby is, which is not important to the plot of the story at all. So like I said, read them out of order if you want. It's perfectly fine. Basically, the summary of this novel is a space truck stop. So this is like travel throughout galaxies, and multiple alien species have been introduced to humanity by the time that all of this takes place. And the characters in this book basically are doing long distance travel between like multiple wormholes, and the planet that they are stopped at, you have to like you fill up on gas or whatever, and you have to like wait in line to like move from like one gate to the next. And so a lot of people will leave the wormhole, go down to this planet, maybe get out of your car or get out of your spaceship for a couple of hours, eat something, walk around because you've been traveling through space for months or days or whatever, and refill your fuel tanks. So it's basically an entire planet that is a truck stop, which is kind of a fun premise. But something goes wrong, and these characters of four different alien races get stuck in this truck stop on a truck stop planet for a couple of days, and it's entirely just character development. So the characters in this book are basically like completely different alien species, not anything anywhere close to humans. None of these characters in this humor. There's humans in other books, but not in this book. Or there's humans in other books in the series, but not in this particular book. And it's just like them discussing their differences and like their own like internal struggles and problems. One thing that I love about Becky Chambers' writing is she is able to be like entirely wholesome in how just people in this universe treat each other with like kindness and respect and decency, just like as a general rule, instead of like being concerned about somebody else's sexuality or gender like we humans are. All of the alien species and even humans in these books are very like understanding of that you can choose your own gender if you want to, especially with like alien species where a lot of them, like, as they reach different points in their life, like literally change genders. Like you'll be female for part of your life while you're breeding, maybe you'll be asexual for part of your life, and you'll be male for part of your life, and each different alien species is different. Even like one of the alien species in this books, you don't know what gender you are until you've gone through puberty. So you're genderless, you're ze or zer, until you've gone through puberty, and then when you go through puberty, you just tell your parents. Just that representation, and like just blanket, unquestioned acceptance is what what I want to read. It's so wholesome, but there's not like lack of conflict in this book. There's two characters in this book who absolutely hate each other just because they have different opinions on a war that's happening. But it's very wholesome without being, again, like lasso. It's very wholesome without like lack of conflict. I would say this is even far more wholesome than a lasso, and all of Becky Chambers' writing is. Rep, obviously there's rep for like LGBTQIA spectrum, like broadly. A lot of trans rep, and asexual rep. So that's good. There's probably, like, you could say that there's rep for like different races because there's like different species of aliens, but it's not like an exact parallel of rep. There's no trigger warnings in here. This is all very, very wholesome. I will say though that if you have to have a very concrete plot to what you read, you're not gonna like this. This is very, 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 very character driven, and the plot is just kind of like background music. Like there is a vague plot, like they're stuck on a planet and it's like a couple of days of being stuck on a planet, but it's not like that. The plot isn't the purpose of this, it's the characters that's the purpose. Star rating 5 stars. Everything Becky Chambers writes gets a 5-star from me. Next up, I read Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. This was from my Feminist Book Club book box. It was okay. This is about a family of women in the Caribbean, specifically Jamaica, who, how do I say this? They're very, 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 very poor Black women. And they're just trying to survive in a country who is made up of mostly Black people, but most of the people with money are white and racist. One of the main characters, Margot, is trying to send her younger sister, Thandi, to school. To give her an education so she can carry their entire family out of poverty. And Margot like hustles to do this, but her main hustle is prostitution. So you've got that. Also, Margot has an issue with her mother, like hers and Thandi's mother. Like she hates her mother, but you don't really know why until the end, and I'm not gonna tell you because that's a spoiler. Rep. There's obviously like Jamaican rep in here. There is queer rep, but Jamaica, like many very overly Christianized countries, it's illegal to be gay in Jamaica. So, like, it's worse to be queer in this country than it is to be a murderer or a rapist. Like, if you are a gay man caught in a gay relationship, you will be murdered. If you were a gay woman caught in a gay relationship, you may be murdered, or you more likely just be endlessly raped, to like demonstrate what you're supposed to like, which is icky. there's a lot of trigger warnings in this book. So there's a trigger warning for sex work, there's trigger warnings for rape, lots of trigger warnings for racism. It's very dark. And it's dark in a way that I don't like, because I love dark books, but I did discover that what I like about dark books is like unrealistic dark books. Like if it's a fantasy or like a horror or something like that, where I can't imagine like the instances of horror actually happening to a real person, I like it. Or even like historical doesn't bother me, because I like a lot of really dark historicals. But like something like this takes place in the 90s, but it's written in a way where it could be modern, and I can imagine this happening to like real women. Like if you had told me that this was a true story, I would have blindly believed you on that. And I gave this a 3-star because while it was a powerful story, I didn't enjoy it. Next up for I was Illusion of Thieves by Kate Glass. This was an old book that I got in a book box in like 2019 or 2020. I don't even remember which book box it came in, but I do know that I did not buy this for myself. Basically what this is about is like this main character is a prostitute slave owned by like the ruler of this city, but she's got kind of like this relation, like this like caring relationship with him, which first of all, before I even finish the plot, that's fucking rape and it's icky. It didn't need to be in here. Anyway, her, in this universe, like magic is outlawed, and anybody caught practicing magic is killed. Her brother is caught thieving and through use of magic, and she kind of has to somehow wiggle him out of being punished, because they don't know he's using magic, but they can easily find out. She has to like wiggle out of his being punished, and that results in her banishment. And then like the rest of the book is like a mystery, or not a mystery, a heist. The rest of the book is a heist, because she was born poor and apparently has these abilities that it doesn't even make sense. There's nothing about her that makes it where she should be able to pull off this heist. She has no training, but she magically just becomes a heist, or she magically falls into this like ability to lead a heist. Not like actual magic magically, but just like convenience of the story magically. Overall, this is very generic. There's nothing special about it. The plot's fine, but not great. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just mediocre. It's all around mediocre. I didn't hate it. I gave it 3 stars. Rep, there's no rep in here. There's no rep in here. Trigger warnings, you do have like rape and slavery that like the rape and slavery like has to do with the plot, but you could have had the exact same story by taking that out. Child abuse is something else in here, and then general violence. Thieving. I don't actually know if that's a trigger for people, but they're thieves. So maybe it is. And I gave this a 3 stars because, like I said, it was fine. It just wasn't great. Next up, I read a classic, Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. So basically the main character, Jude, he is born into a family that is cursed in marriage. Like they're cursed for any marriage that they're in to fail. And this takes place at like the end of the Victorian era, just so you got a general time frame. He's English, I think, but poor. Jude wants to be a scholar, but he doesn't really have a whole lot of opportunity to be a scholar because he's poor, and even though he's intelligent, no one will really give him a chance due to lack of money. So, I mean, it kind of follows him throughout his life, where you have like a little bit of focus on like him not being able to educate himself in like a university because of his social status, but also like him being unlucky in love. And it's a 6-part story, and like the first 5 parts of the story are like this like unlucky in love, like almost comedic look on his life. He ends up falling in love with his cousin, which is ew. And then it's like she's also part of the cursed family, so there's like the whole like I'm in love but we can't be together because of the curse, but we love each other but we can't be together because of the curse. His cousin is also like the worst, and this is, how do I say this? This is a misogynistic outlook on this female character from like, or this is a misogynistic portrayal of a female from a white male author, but her personality is basically one where she's like, she's very like overly flirtatious with a lot of men, not necessarily just Jude, but like all of the men that she encounters in this story, where she behaves in a way that is not appropriate for her actual feelings for these people. She comes across as like mostly asexual in this book, but this is like written well before asexuality was an acknowledged thing that exists. But she doesn't really have any like, a lot of her character portrays asexuality. This is not a great asexual rep because eventually she ends up barefoot and pregnant because it's written by a white man in the Victorian era. Like, of course she's going to end up barefoot and pregnant, but for most of the book she presents as asexual. Even though she has no real desire for like sexual things, she pushes the boundaries of her relationship with men, where she will lead them on like a lot, and then like right when they're about to like have sex, she'll be like, no, I can't. And then the guy will be like, I do have to say this is great, like every single time she says no to any man in this book, they instantly stop. And they don't even be like, are you sure? They're just like, yes ma'am, full stop. And men today need to be more fucking like that. I will say the only people I want to recommend this book to are men who think it is okay to continue to pressure women to have any sort of like physical relationship with them when the woman has clearly said no, because this is the behavior that we need from all men. Minor rant over there, but she tells them to stop, they stop, and then they're just like, okay, I'm going to move on. Like, you obviously have told me with your words and your actions that you do not want to be in a relationship with me, and they'll like move on to another woman, or even just like back away from her and stop pressuring her. And she's just like, you don't love me anymore. Ugh. Why are you so cruel to me? And then she like throws like a hissy fit about like basically just keeping all of these guys like on a tether, where it's like, I don't want you to be sexually interested in me, or no, I want you to be sexually interested in me, though I am never going to agree to act on that interest. You're not allowed to be interested in any other women, or I get extremely jealous, but I am never going to like return these feelings. And all of that is just like fucked up, but it's like, it makes women look bad, though it should make the man who wrote women like this look bad. That's the best I can do with that. As far as rep, other than that like asexual rep, that's I mean, this was Victorian England. There's no rep unless you're a straight white person. Trigger warnings. part 6 of the story. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this for you, so if you're not interested in this spoiler, go ahead and skip ahead in this video until the cover for this book is off the screen, because this is something that I don't think people should go into blindly, because it's like really, really bad. For the minor spoiler, where if you just want to know what I'm about to talk about and see if you want to continue on or not, is the death of children and suicide. Now, for those of you who are still here who want to know like what the F happened, by the end of the story, Jude and Sue, or by part 6 of the story, Jude and Sue are married, and they have one child of Jude's, a son of Jude's, who's like 8 to 10 from a previous marriage, and then from their marriage they have a toddler and an infant. The older boy somehow gets it, like he's always been like a very old soul basically, and he somehow gets it into his head that him and his siblings are the reason that his parents aren't succeeding in life and the reason why they're poor. And so he murders both the toddler and the infant by like putting a strap around their neck and like hanging them like on a coat rack on a wall, and then he hangs himself. And as I said earlier, like up to this point, like this had been reading like as a comedy, and just to like hit me with that out of nowhere was so dark and uncomfortable to read. Overall, I gave this 3 stars because while I like dark stories like that, and while I really appreciate the like anti-rapey message that was prevalent throughout this book, I didn't like the misogyny, and I hate when bad things happen to small children. So we even out the good and the bad and land on a 3 right in the middle. After Jude the Obscure, I read Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a new release, and this is basically about a futuristic time, and rich children, I should say, have things called AFs, which are artificial friends, and this is from the perspective of Clara, who is an artificial friend. Basically, they are androids who are bought by rich families to spend time with a child through their like preteens and teens. It basically is like companionship in a world where no one like physically goes out and makes friends anymore. Like there's no schools or anything, everything's like online homeschool, so the AFs are kind of like a way for them to have another companion of their own age, and each AF has like their own personality a little bit, and we follow Clara through this this book, and it basically follows her from the time that she's in the store and like looking out on the world and observing things around her and kind of learning through observation and through getting like purchased and being with a young girl. And it's a very interesting take because a lot of times you don't have an idea what's going on. There's a lot of things in this book that are never explained because it's something that Clara would never know about. So it's confusing and difficult, but it's also like a very, very interesting character study of like what it means to be human, what it means to be compassionate about each other, and also kind of like a thought of like, can a robot have a soul? Rep, I don't think there's really any rep in here. The characters are Japanese and English, but so is Kazuo Ishiguro. He's a Japanese man who lives in England. So I guess you have BIPOC rep. from a BIPOC author. But there's no like any basis for any like relationships. So there's no like LGBTQIA plus relationships, or there might be, but it's just not on page. It's not really ever talked about. Trigger warnings, illness, depression, death, xenophobia, I would say, are trigger warnings. They're all handled in a very, very good way, but they do exist in this book. As far as star rating, I'm on the fence. It's between like a high 4, low 5. So I don't know. We'll figure this out at the end of the month. We finally made it to the last book I'm talking about right now. Holy shit, this video is long. I'm sorry. It is Litany of Dreams by Ari Marmel. This is an Arkham horror novel, or a novel in the Arkham horror universe. And you might have noticed if you've watched some of my previous videos, I thought this was Batman, because I don't know, Arkham, I think Arkham Asylum, and I think all of the Batman villains. No, apparently Arkham Horror is a tabletop game that is based off of Lovecraftian mythos. So Cthulhu, not Batman. And so this is set in the 1920s in New England, and basically a student and a professor have gone missing, and their friends kind of like get together to solve a mystery of like what happened to them. It is horror, but it's not like, I don't know how to explain this. I didn't find it particularly frightening or scary. Lovecraftian horror is more like fucking with your brain type horror, and in this one it didn't feel like it wasn't fucking with the reader's brains, it's fucking with the character's brains. So you're kind of like outside looking in, which like completely got rid of any actual horror aspects for me, because it wasn't something that I would have been experiencing. There's also like body horror in here a little bit, so at times it was kind of gross, but not the worst I've read. Rep, I was actually kind of surprised at this. There was one of the characters in here is Inuit, and we had to deal, or he as a character in the 1920s dealt a lot with racism, especially like just anytime like he would walk around in the city, like people would like instantly distrust him, instantly just be rude to him because of his race. And then there were a lot of people who kept referring to him as an Eskimo, and he would say, no, it's Inuit. And they would be like, yeah, I know you're an Eskimo. And he'd be like, stop calling me Eskimo, I am Inuit. And then they would just like refuse to do that, and they would keep using the wrong terms just because they're racist. And it was like, it was racism with a purpose. Like, you understood that this is wrong. So I guess there's trigger warnings for racism, trigger warnings for the wrong use of tribal names, and then trigger warnings for body horror, and then like the general death and violence, because it's a horror book, so it kind of happens like that. Star rating, I think I literally just finished this today, but I think I gave this a 4-star. I actually surprisingly enjoyed it. I didn't think that I would enjoy this at all, but I liked the like mystery aspect of it. I wouldn't like say this is like a great horror novel, but if we're talking like a good mystery novel, then I definitely enjoyed it. And as you can see, the cover is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. This is an ARC, it's not out until April. But once it comes out, I'm going to buy this book, and then there's another book in this universe that has a very similar color that has a very similar cover that I am also going to purchase. So that is my mid-month wrap-up and a whole hell of a lot of talking. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or let me know if any of these books are now on your TBR after I've talked about them. The letters M through Z will be in my end of month wrap up, so make sure you subscribe and come back and see what I think of the books that I read for those letters. Bye!